What is up, everybody? It's Don with the Don Tech, and today I wanted to go ahead and answer some questions, not so much that you've asked, but just kind of in a generality sense of why I'm recommending these parts to be purchased over some other sort of manufacturers or brands, and the importance of the particular parts that were chosen. So this is going to be part 2 of this video series. Not exactly sure if there's going to be any need for any additional parts in the series, but if you have any questions, leave them in the comments down below, and I'll go ahead and respond to them and get them all answered for you. So let's go ahead and get started and go back to the PC part picker list. This is going to be linked in the description down below as well. So if you've forgotten, or if you haven't seen the video, whatever it is, this is pretty much a list of parts that I'd be buying if I were to build a computer today. And that means that I went through, searched through all the parts and everything, found them all, fit in a budget that I was trying to stick within, which was around $2,000, which is a good price point when you're trying to build a gaming or multimedia based machine, and stuck them all together. And I wanted to, like I said, go through each of those individually. So the parts themselves come to about 1980-29. That's when it's picking them for me. I have tabs open on all of them through Newegg, so I can go through the parts individually and show you some comparisons if necessary. So the parts on Newegg are going to be a little bit more expensive than probably what you see here. That's okay, just kind of what we're going through. So starting off with the processor itself, as I mentioned in the previous video, I'm going to stick with Intel until the Ryzen AMD platform can prove to be reliable. And what that means is that I don't want to buy a machine or build a machine or spend a lot of money on a machine that is going to have a high likelihood of failing within a couple of months or just a couple of years. I have not had a single custom build die on me in any of the time I've done it for personal and professional venues and everything. So I take really good pride in that I've picked the correct parts and knowing that they're not going to fail. And that's something that I still want to keep doing. I don't want to replace my computer in a couple of years because parts went bad. I want to replace it after I feel the need, have the itch to upgrade and everything. So when it comes to the processors, the Intel i7 is the way to go for me. They have the i5s that are going to be the 7600Ks, and those are okay, but they're not going to be what I would want and everything. So primarily going back here, you're going to focus on the first number 7s for the KB Lake. That's going to be the generation that I would be going towards. And you don't really want to go any lower than, say, an i5. What would be that? 60, let's see, i5 and 6500 or 7500, I mean. This one right here. So the primary that you got is this i5, which is a quad core at 3.4 gigahertz for $199, so $200 for that. But up here you have the unlocked variant that's a higher clock speed at 239, so just another $40. And then for $100 more, you get the processor that I was going for. Either one of those three would be just fine, but if you have something that you need to have a lot of reliability in the performance and everything, definitely go with the i7. And I'm not focusing on the X99 or the X299 that's coming out. This is strictly on the more consumer-based, not the enthusiast-based. I did a good amount of conversations with motherboards in my previous video, just in relation to which ones of this particular Asus type I would recommend. I always go with Asus for my motherboards. I've been called a fanboy, doesn't really matter. If you think that buying a product because it's better is fanboyism, then it's fanboyism. But Asus boards will not fail. I mean, they can fail, but they have a higher likelihood of not failing. And I have not had a single board failed that I've purchased and replaced and everything in regards to Asus. And as long as you're buying with the proper price point, usually you're going to get a better board. Now, the challenge with that, and we'll go to these some of these other boards, is that price does not mean better overall. Generally, as a rule, yes. So we're going to go ahead and stick with the 1151s and just kind of see. There's a lot of motherboards on it, and just sort by highest price. Let's just go from there. And Gigabyte is already the highest price motherboard, $700. It's a waste of your money. Asus, even that honestly is a waste of your money. It's just, unless you're doing the water cooling thing, but buy your own separate block and don't really focus too much on it being integrated like that. And it's funny how open box ones are like that, that expensive. And MSI and ASRock, if that's on here. But it looks like it's just primarily Asus, Gigabyte, and some MSI mixed in and everything. So I would, under no circumstances, ever buy a $340 MSI motherboard, unless MSI changes their game and actually makes better products. The amount of times I've had an MSI, Gigabyte, ASRock come through and fail, either badly made or the client's just got the raw end of the deal. But if I have a client that went out and bought a brand new $400 MSI motherboard, and this has actually happened, and it died within 30 days of use, that's just not a good thing overall. And your experience is going to vary. A lot of people have used all these different boards, and clearly they're still in business, so they're not doing everything wrong. But on the personal and professional spectrum of things, I would never recommend or purchase one of those myself. So outside of the boards that I had in the first video talking about what I'd recommend, I'd go with the Asus TUF Z270 Mark I board if you wanted to go for something that was a little bit more on the robust and reliable side. Now, it's not going to win any awards for being pretty or anything like that, as you can see, but it's something that is going to be a very stable board, and I've used these in my builds as well, and usually they were having a 5-year warranty. They've reduced that down to 3-year warranty, so that's a little bit of a question that I would have as to why did they make it so 2 years less of the warranty. But it's kind of the thing that the warranty is only good if you need to use it. But that was what I like seeing on the TUF series, is that it had a better warranty on it. So if they're kind of getting rid of that, that loses its appeal. But it could also be that they're changing that a little bit because their Maximus boards are so fantastic that they're not selling as many of these, perhaps. And a final note on motherboards themselves, go with the standard ATX. Don't fuss with the micro ATX or the ITX unless you have to build a machine that's that small a form factor. The Asus boards themselves, I don't exactly know what they make in relation to, we go to mini and micro, right? Just to kind of see what they have. They have a lot of micro ATXs, but the mini ITX, they have some if it's still with the Republic of Gamers, or the Maximus or something like that. So this is the Maximus right here for the mini ITX, and then they also have a Strix for the mini ITX. So those I would probably recommend if you needed to. Go for a mini or micro or something like that, but if you can avoid it, get the full-size one and everything, and try to buy a case that you can put a full-size one into. Those boards just have, by design, a better lifespan in them, and probably I see a 2-to-1 failure of micro versus the standard ATX boards. Moving on to a cooler now, I'd still recommend a Corsair-based cooler. The other ones are notorious for having pump leak issues, and we'll go to some other liquid coolers here, and I can point out some that would have problems, but the Corsair, those are the ones I've always used, and I've never had a problem with it. If you want to go to air cooling, you can, but it's kind of not really as much of a point. In my opinion, yeah, the temperature degrees, if you get a really good air cooler versus a liquid cooler, they're not going to be like, wow, this is like legit water cooling, but it's going to be traditionally better with lower noise and better heat dissipation. So instead of having all the heat in one area, you have it through the radiator and everything like that. So that's something that can help. And the difference between a 120mm, 240mm, 360mm, you can find your own respective benchmarks based on the particular product you'd be looking at. But in theory, how it's supposed to go is the 120 is cool, the worst, 240 is the middle, and then the 360s are going to be the best. That's not always the case because there's a difference in fin density and just how they actually move the liquid through, and if the pump is actually good at moving the liquid through as well. And so Corsair only makes the 120s and the 240s. They make the 280s, but that's a specialized kind of out there scenario. And I've never had any problem, like I said, and I would not recommend that you use a different product because it can leak. And speaking of them leaking itself, that's where I'm going to go to some of these others and just look through them real quick. Deepcool and their GamerStorm. I was using that in my new office computer, and in less than a month, the pump started to leak. And this was not an overclocked machine. The system was never stressed to the point where the temperatures would ever get above 30 degrees Celsius, even with all the stuff that I was doing on it and everything. So it was never stressed, not used for gaming or anything like that, strictly a workhorse machine. And the 360 variant radiator that I had, which I bought from Deepcool because that was the appeal, because I wanted a 360 radiator, ended up leaking within that month. So that one and the Enermax, Silverstone, I don't actually really know much about those, but the reviews might say something. And the NZXT, the Thermaltake isn't really that's an open loop right there, but the Thermaltake closed loop can be kind of a hit or miss on some of those. And they have fractal design as well, which I'm using a 360 fractal design right now. The temperatures are great, but I can't recommend it until I know that I'm not going to have a pump issue. So I hope the idea that you're getting behind this whole video is that I'm recommending parts that I've used that I know will be reliable, not stuff that just looks cool or would be the cheapest or be the fastest or something like that. It's something that will last. So you have the Cooler Masters, and you have a whole bunch of different ones that come when you buy the the machines from CyberPower and iBuyPower. They will usually put the cheapest sort of 120 millimeter all-in-one cooler that they can in the machine, and I'm replacing those things a lot. So I've had, like I said, a lot of experience with the Corsair ones, and this is all for closed loop. If you're going to be doing an open loop and actually do it yourself, I would recommend EK water blocks. I haven't used them myself personally. My editing rig to my left here is using the Thermaltake one that is designed for the case, and so I tried that. I liked it and everything, but I've heard really good things about EK water blocks. I've never tried them though, but that's what I would suggest, especially based on Jay's 2 cents, because if there's somebody that knows something about water cooling, I'd refer to Jay's 2 cents on that for now. And one final thing about pump leaks: when it can leak, it can go onto a ton of different components depending on how your motherboard and everything is all situated and the orientation of your case. If I had my machine go ahead and it leaked right now from the pump, it would get on my power supply, the motherboard, and the graphics card. And it could damage all of those. And not to mention, it would go on the floor because it's mounted on the wall right now. So that's something that would be terrible if that pump were to leak. I mean, it could ruin the carpet or just make a stain, all that sort of stuff. So that's not really anything that I'd be into, and I don't want you guys to have to worry about that same fate. Now, coming to the memory. In my previous video as well, I had mentioned the 2 primary brands that I would stick with for memory: Corsair and G.Skill. And then the 2 types of memory within those brands, which would be the G.Skill Trident Z, or the Corsair Dominator series, as I have up here, or the Vengeance series and everything. So when it comes between the 2 of them, it's pretty much just a matter of price and if you want any lighting. The G.Skill Trident Z does have lighting in it now. They have some RGB variants. My Trident Z is just a standard red, white, silver, black sort of, color to it and everything that matched the motherboard at the time, and it's a beautiful looking pair of memory for me. Otherwise, the Corsair Dominator can add a really nice layout to things. I've used a mixture of Corsair and G.Skill in all of my builds, and I haven't had any problems with them. If you try to get cheaper memory and you go in the ADATA route, or anything that would be, I don't even know some of the cheaper memory manufacturers now, but the cheaper that you get, usually the worse off that you're going to be. And there's a reason why some of the memory is more expensive, and it's not just for brand. And it's something that has to do with the way that the chips are and the actual reliability and their just ability to perform correctly all the time. And I think that might qualify under the binning category if I'm not mistaken, but that's a whole separate video for another time. So just a list of memory that I would not use, since I'm kind of going through and getting to the parts that you can use more than just 1 or 2 sort of parts for it. I would not recommend G.Skill except the Trident Z. I wouldn't really recommend the Kingston either. Their HyperX stuff is supposed to be okay, but I've had some of those sticks come in faulty before, so I can't recommend it. Similar to the Corsair, the Vengeance LPX line. So that's supposed to be low performance and everything, or not low performance, low profile, and I've had those have problems before, so I just can't recommend them. So Geal, I wouldn't recommend. Mushkin, I wouldn't recommend that either. Crucial used to make fantastic memory, but they kind of not lost a step, but they just kept doing the same basic thing over and over. Now this is DDR3. Let me just go to DDR4, and so we can show the Crucial memory in there. But they just kind of lost a step. They didn't really keep up with things. They didn't make it to be the best and the most elite sort of memory. So that's something that I couldn't really, not so much not recommend, but I just wouldn't really use. They're not mainstream enough, if that makes sense. And that's almost kind of about it when it comes to the memory side of things. They don't have a ton of different, I mean, there are a lot of different manufacturers, but I wouldn't really recommend any of these. Except avoid Patriot. For everything that you do, avoid Patriot memory. Oh my goodness. It's just some of the worst memory. That's when you go into Staples and you're like, I want to upgrade my machine to get the most amount of RAM that I can. And the tech there, or the sales associate, whoever, will point you right to their Patriot memory. And that is the cheapest stuff. And I don't mean cheapest with price, but the heat sinks, the metal heat sinks that they put on them, are so thin. And it's just a matter of quality construction, not so much that, oh, it's thinner so it's not going to perform as well. There's not really much of a difference you get in the heat spreaders in relation to the performance. It's more so just the overall, they can't be bothered to put good quality even on their metal heat sinks for the actual memory itself. So that's something that I keep in mind. I mean, Patriot's just, it's laughable how bad Patriot memory is. So never buy Patriot. It's probably going to be the cheapest option, but never buy Patriot. This is where we get to a little bit more of the interesting side of things. The Internal SSDs. We have the M.2 SSD, which this one is on the NVMe platform, and then we also have the traditional SSDs. So the M.2 is something stick a gum, plugs in, and that's going to give you ridiculous speed. Usually you're going to have to sacrifice something, be it some SATA ports, or even if you want to do multiple, sometimes a couple of slots, if you would, for where you would traditionally put your graphics card. So it would use some of the PCI Express lanes. So if you're really putting just one drive in there, like this one drive would be your boot drive, and then you have another drive as a storage drive, it's not a problem. The moment you start to go to 2 for RAID, or you want to get multiples, then you can have some conflicts and problems. But outside of that, for the brand itself, for both the SSD and the M.2, I'd recommend Samsung. And they are a little bit more on the expensive side versus their competitors. If they make bad memory of it, they're probably going to make bad an SSD. So ADATA, I wouldn't really trust their SSDs either. And so Samsung is pretty much the main one that I would trust. Western Digital, I like for their mechanical drives. Their SSDs are much less expensive. So I got a 500 gig SSD right here for $150 versus the Samsung variant of $180. Why is there a difference? Is it just because they want to be cheaper, they want to undercut it, or is there something where they make a lesser quality product? So I've not tried the Western Digital stuff, and it's for 2 reasons. One is going to be that I've used the Samsung drives in SSD form for years. I've sold hundreds of these things. And I'm not just talking like, oh, I sold them to a customer, they never came back again. I mean, I'm talking about I sold them, installed them in their system, installed an operating system, and took care of that whole entire repair process, and I've never had a single one come back. And that's pretty important to realize, that when you're selling something to somebody, are they going to come back? And the second reason is Western Digital has their green drives, which these are the Western Digital Blue, so they'd be along with their blue line of drives. But they've made green drives, and what I mean by that is they've made a bad product before that is likely to fail and can have a lot of problems and is not reliable. So if they've done that for that, what's to say that their blue drives aren't going to make any sacrifices, and that they're not going to come out with a black drive variant of the SSDs that's going to give you better reliability and performance? If they did, then I might consider some sort of a switch, but for the time being, I'd have to just stick with Western Digital for my mechanical drives. And some of the other, honorable mentions here, you have Kingston. They make some pretty decent stuff when it comes to SSDs, and you have Crucial, which kind of like with the memory, it's like they're just playing it safe, and it's kind of okay. I have had a Crucial or 2 fail in my day of repairing them, so repairing computers, so that's kind of makes it so I wouldn't be as keen in recommending them. Kingston, no real experience with those, honestly. And SanDisk, when you get down to the nitty-gritty of like SanDisk and SSDs and the chips and how they're all made and everything like that, it's a whole different subject of conversation, but I've not used the SanDisk ones at all either. Intel, I've used a couple of those. They seem horribly overpriced, or maybe they're just harder to find. And then PNY, just like Patriot, avoid PNY by all costs. That's going to just give you problems. And Mushkin, I mean, it's cute that they're trying, but I can't see that really being anything any decent. So stick with Samsung when it comes to a SSD-based drive. Oh, hey, I was just talking about a black-based drive, and now they have it on the M.2. Is way worse in performance than the one that we were going to pick for our build, the Samsung 960. Just kind of goes to show you, that Samsung's almost got that market cornered, and they make really stinking good stuff. But back to the mechanical side of things, here we are with Western Digital. Like I said, they make really good mechanical drives on the black line. Those are the more performance-oriented drives, 7,200 RPM, 5-year warranty, very robust. Seagate, I haven't had experience with on their higher quality drives, but let me tell you that the drives that the manufacturers put inside of their computers as a standard for, like, if they're going to be Seagate, I replace usually like 5-6 of those every 2 weeks. I mean, it's pretty common how many Seagates I see coming through with a failure and everything. So not to say that Western Digital doesn't fail, not to say that it can't fail. Redundancy is key when it comes to making sure you have all your data files saved. But if you want the best sort of mechanical drive, Western Digital Black is the way to go in that. And if you're shopping around trying to save money and everything like that, just buy probably a lesser size drive versus a lesser quality drive. Because if you're going through and you want to buy, the Western Digital can make their green base drives or something like that, which I'm not actually seeing, which is encouraging. But you're just really getting lower end stuff, not getting anything decent. Now we go on over to the graphics cards. So I'm sticking with NVIDIA because they pretty much have the market cornered on that. AMD has some stuff in the works. It might be good, might be okay. Who knows how it's going to actually be. But right now, NVIDIA is going to be the way to go for me, and even on the budget conscious way, because the product itself will last. So I'm not even going to focus on the AMD side of graphics cards, the Radeon side of graphics cards, and those manufacturers. But on the NVIDIA side of things, what we're going to go through is look at the graphics cards that they have. Obviously, I recommend Asus. They have fantastic products all across the board, including their graphics cards. I personally have a 1080 with an Asus, and I've had a couple of EVGAs as well. And I have had an EVGA 780 fail me, 2 years ago or something like that, after I've owned it for about 2 years. So that was very disappointing, but again, there are variants in some of these things. There is variance in some of these things. Things will fail, things will have a problem, and nobody is perfect, and nobody can have anything perfect, but this is to help eliminate those chances. So, similar with motherboards and memory and other products like that, what I would recommend are certain brands because they've proven to have reliability over the years, whereas other brands have proven to either come DOA or just have no lifespan with them whatsoever. Your mileage will vary, but just understand that when you're buying a part, you're not buying it to last for 1 to 2 years. You want it to exceed the life of your computer, because then guess what you can do? When you want to build a whole new machine, you can go ahead and sell this one and put that money towards another computer. Because I just sold a computer that I built in 2010, so a 7-year-old machine. I just sold that for $700. And that's pretty much without a graphics card. So $700 from the upgrades I've done to it, water cooler, SSD, all that sort of stuff. And because it was in great condition, and it's going to last the customer easily for another 3 to 5 years. And that's a great value for the machine that they were getting versus what else you could buy at the store. Graphics cards are kind of a pick your poison in a sense. It's kind of how much money do you want to spend that, get that caliber of a graphics card. And the same thing applies with some of these manufacturers. You want to avoid PNY, you want to avoid Gigabyte, you want to avoid MSI. And even looking through here and seeing, that, yeah, Gigabyte has a couple of them, and, there's one Asus in all these that I've seen so far, and they just are not going to have the same reliability. So the Gigabyte ones, I've had some of those fail. MSI, same thing. I've had my own MSI fail before on me in the past. So there's experience that comes with what I'm saying. And when I look at some of these, the PNY GeForce 1080 Ti, I couldn't imagine myself spending $700 on a graphics card from PNY, from a manufacturer that has proven time and time again to have problems with their parts. So it's just funny that they make those, and maybe there is some differences where they're just branding the particular card or something like that. But when they get their hands on it and they're making their own thing with their own shroud and they're using their own sort of chipset, if you will, their own PCB, then that's when you can have some of the problems. And it does make for building a very boring computer when you have to go through and go, okay, I want to build a computer today. What of the 3 parts do I want to use? Because each machine almost becomes cookie cutter. But again, reliability versus what looks pretty. I think it was Kyle from Bitwit built a machine a couple of months ago, maybe in April or so. And he went ahead and decided to go and just build a titanium white silver looking machine just so it could look good. And he even stated in the video, I didn't take into account the parts that were any good, anything that was going to last, or price. I just wanted everything to match. So when you build that way, you're going to kind of get what you have to get. But I can guarantee you that if he's not using that machine as his primary, and if he was, he'd be having some problems with it because of the components that he had chosen. So what I'm trying to say here is, if you really want a lot of customization, get an open loop water system, or just get some RGB fans, and just get a decent case, mod it or something like that. That's where the personality and the personalization is going to come from. Now we're down to the final 2 items. This one is going to be for the power supply itself, and power supplies are a very good backbone of your computer. They're going to help make sure that every component is getting the proper power, and it's going to be regulating it to make sure that it's getting the proper power, not being overloaded, underloaded, or anything like that. There are some discussions about a Corsair is just a rebranded X power supply, and EVGA is just a rebranded Y power supply, those sort of things. I don't really know what those are, but I do know that between EVGA and Corsair, they are different power supplies and they have different reliability factors. And I have seen every power supply pretty much that you can think of have a failure. And that's because there are more than just what the power supply is made out of at stake. Do you have a battery backup connected to your machine? Do you have a lot of brownouts in your area? I know here in Texas, we get surges and brownouts and crazy storms like crazy, and that's something that we just have to deal with. So if you put a battery backup on it and it has that line conditioner, that's going to help make sure that the power supply is getting clean power all the time, and it's going to help reduce the problems that you may have with the actual power supply itself. I opened up for a customer a couple of weeks ago a Rosewell Platinum 1000 watt power supply, and that felt like the cheapest thing that I've ever built with when of that caliber of a 1000 watt power supply. It was insane. And Rosewell, that's another video for a different time, but their products are just garbage. And you can look at them and see what they make and everything. Works, it usually won't work long, or it just ends up not being the correct thing that you need. So this poor guy, I don't know how long he's going to have the power supply, but the first thunderstorm that comes through, I wouldn't be surprised if that power supply gets knocked out. Now, I personally have never had a Corsair power supply go out on me on any of the builds I've used, but I have had customers that have brought some in that have had the problem and everything. And sometimes power supplies can have a problem, not so much where it just means the machine won't turn on, but that under heavy loads, the machine is going to shut down because the power supply, even though adequate in wattage, can't handle the load at that amount. So if you have a 1000 watt power supply and on idle it's using 200 watts or something like that, you bring it up to full load and it's at 550 watts, let's say. When it gets to that threshold of 550, 600 watts, even though it's a 1000 watt power supply, it may shut off or have inconsistent problems because the power supply was damaged from the consistent, weather events or something like that that's going on. So a good power supply, like a good motherboard, is going to really fit you well. And EVGA, I mean, they're making a lot of parts. They're making a lot of power supplies, and their power supplies have fantastic ratings all across the board. But the amount of those I've had come in that have failed is insane. And I'm talking the gold and the platinum ones and everything. I'm not talking the bronze-ish. I've seen those fail as well. The problem with it is that if you're spending that much money getting this, this one right here, the Supernova 1000 watt platinum power supply, this thing should last years. Even with a lot of power events and everything, it should last you a good number of years because it should be built well enough on the inside that even if you have some of those power events, it's able to condition it itself. And 10-year warranty, so that's at least good. That's what I like seeing. That Rosewell one I was mentioning only had a 5-year warranty on a gold or on a platinum rated power supply. And I'm just going to see if we can find that here. Yeah, it was the Quark. Quark? That kid spent $220 on this? I don't even know what to say. I would not. I mean, they haven't even bothered to update it from the Intel 4th generation CPU ready machine. They haven't even updated the text from then, and we're on now the 7th generation. That just kind of shows laziness on their part. 5-year warranty, 80 plus platinum. I mean, I don't know what they're going to even be talking about. The parts are 1-year warranty. So that's just absolutely insane. I can't understand why anybody would spend $200 on that power supply, whereas if you go to back to the Corsair one here, 80 plus gold, let's just stick it up to a 1000 watt. A 1000 watt power supply, $160. Out of stock, so you might be able to find it somewhere else, but even at the list price, $180 versus this, I don't know, that's insane. So I'm getting off on a little bit of a tangent here. So let's go back to the power supplies. And obviously Rosewell I wouldn't recommend. EVGA, honestly, I would not even recommend because I've had so many of those come in and fail. The Thermaltake ones, yeah, same thing. Those are, I'd rate those a little bit better than the EVGA, just based on my personal experience alone, but I probably wouldn't recommend that either. I've had people use Seasonic ones as well. Those are packaged well, and they come with a lot of neat little goodies, but I don't think I'd recommend putting one of those in a machine. I'd still stick with the Corsair. Raid Max, you're getting kind of more into the basic ones that come with a computer or something like that. Probably wouldn't recommend those. The Rosewell, that's just asking for disaster. Now the final bit is going to be the actual case itself and why I chose a Fantex. As I mentioned in the previous video, which is how I think I start every single one of these particular parts, but I mentioned in the previous video I like Corsair and Vantex for my cases, but I've used a whole bunch of different other cases, including the Leon Lee for my office and the Thermaltake Core P5 that's hanging up on my for my editing rig and everything. So the Thermaltake one was actually probably my most favorite of builds because it was such an open-ended design and I knew that I was going to mount it on the wall, so it kind of changed some things with it. But cases all really come down to personal preference, really, because the case, I mean, there's so many different types of cases. It's insane. And some people are going to like some that won't. And some people are going to have a case design or a room design where they need to have the window on the right side of the case instead of the left side. And that means you need to invert the motherboard and invert everything. And they don't make a lot of them, but I think Corsair definitely makes some. So I've even used some NZXT cases as well. I've liked those, but it's a would I prefer building in it again. So what we have the luxury of right now with cases, there's so many different types. You cannot really even begin to build in all the cases you'd want to build in. So you look through here, it's changed so much back when I was building my first computer, where you would get kind of stuff like this Raid Max basic Viper sort of situation. It was all like molded plastics and a pushed out window, all that sort of stuff. So they still have some of those computers, but they're really cheap, some of those cases. But the benefit now is if you want to make something look really, really pretty, you've got the tempered glass on one side, all over it, anything that you'd want to do. I don't see myself ever building, like with this Corsair, I don't see myself ever building with a full-blown tempered glass. It's going to be pretty for the first couple of weeks, but then it's never going to be clean again. It's just like, it can't be, because anytime you want to try to move it, do anything, it's just going to get dust and dirt and fingerprints on it everywhere. Some people might have had better luck with it, but I'd prefer a little bit less maintenance on that side. But nowadays, since we're as well getting rid of the CD drives and everything, you can put more fans in the front. It used to be that some cases would just have one fan in the front, have all these bays for hard drives, and then it would go and just expect you to cool everything out of the back, maybe underneath and something on top. But since water cooling has become such a thing, you can mount a 360 radiator at the top in the front, and you can even mount a, sometimes you can even get, I think, 2 radiators in there, one at the top, one at the front, if you wanted to get something with a graphics card, or I don't even know what else you would really use it for. So the point is, they've, on a lot of cases, gotten rid of the ability for a lot of hard drives and CD drives, which is a perfect move, because if you need a CD drive, get the USB one, and you're just so much better off. One of my favorite cases of all time, actually, is going to be this Corsair 760T. I have the black and red version, which they still have, so that's cool too. This is probably one of my all-time favorite cases I've ever built in. I've built it for myself, I've built it for a customer. My gaming machine still uses this particular rig itself. It's cool, it's quiet, it looks gorgeous, and it's in that red theme, and I absolutely love it, and it has plenty of room, and it's pretty affordable as well. So that's probably one of my all-time favorite cases. The other one that I'm using is the Leon Lee 06SX. This is with a micro ATX motherboard, and that's something that it's a pretty nice case. It's expensive, but it's built. It's a Leon Lee case. Those guys use excellent quality in their stuff. And then on some of these, they have the Thermaltake P5. I'm using this Core P5 right here for my editing rig. That's a nice one. They had a smaller one, but that might be like a P3 or something like that. I don't know. And I'm always going through and looking at cases, and I'm like, man, I would like to build in that case. And then I think of a computer project I'd like to make and then put it inside of that particular case. I don't have anything quite yet, but this case intrigues the heck out of me. This Thermaltake 900 black case, or black or white, doesn't really matter. Probably white would be cooler in my opinion, maybe to make like kind of a snow sort of theme, but it's just absolutely insane of a case where you can, it looks ridiculous. And it's like, wow, how do you do that? It has a sideways mounted motherboard, and the graphics card would be going lengthwise this way, and you had a radiator here or somewhere else, depending on if you want to do a closed loop system or something like that. It just looks like a really cool build, and it's kind of in a cube square sort of thing. And tempered glass as well is always neat to boot in that sort of case, because the entire thing is in tempered glass. You just have 3 sides that are tempered glass, so that's pretty easy. So thank you so much for watching me ramble on for who knows how many minutes about why I would pick particular parts. As I mentioned, if you have any questions, leave them in the comments down below. Tweet me at the Don Tech itself, and I can go ahead and give you any insight in regards to what parts I'd recommend or would not recommend. Give this video a like if you found it helpful. Give it a dislike if you like to buy parts that are going to fail on you in a month or in a year or two. And subscribe if you haven't already and you want to see additional videos. I'll see you in the next one. And remember, the Don's got your back.